a motion, and I think you have to respect that that was his motion. You know, now if we have a motion and a second, so we can discuss the points around that motion, but he did make that motion, and, you know, you don't get a chance to change it for him. Okay, any other discussion around that? Obviously, I don't accept denying the cure and correct, and think that once again we are focusing too much on this notion of guilt and innocence, and not enough on the fact that we did not follow a process that was open and included board discussion in a public session. So I absolutely find it very simple to me that that's the way that you actually address it, is to just simply say we can do it over and do it better. I would like to ask Dr. Lawrence at this time though, since the focus is on, and was on Monday night, I mentioned these several errors in these contracts, and Mr. Lawrence is saying that these contracts need to be reviewed and corrected. Who wrote these contracts? Who made those changes to those contracts that the board members signed? Because I myself never had a public discussion around it, and I never signed them and heard any answer to that. Who wrote these contracts that have been presented and are at the center of all this controversy?
I'd have to go back to Mr. Rolen and ask him, because I didn't, the only things I said is change the date. So basically the 2013 to 2014 was the only direction that I gave. And Mrs. Joseph's not here tonight, and Mr. Rolen's not here tonight. So I can't speak to any other changes that were made in the contract and who gave direction or who wrote that. So we'd have to wait until Mr. Rolen and Mrs. Joseph were available.
So those contracts were in Mr. Rolen's hands, and you suggested that we change that date then, and then we don't know what happened after that.
The date was approved at the April 23rd board meeting for the extension. So basically that was the only part of the contract that, based on that action, that I recommended be changed. And so if anything else was changed, I'm not sure who made those recommendations.
See, that bothers me, because part of what we're discussing here, there are some things in the contracts that need to be cleaned up, so it bothers me that we don't know who actually put those documents together. So we have no answer here tonight on who put those documents together.
If you're asking about the contract documents, Greg Rolen, our General Counsel, oversaw the writing of the contracts themselves.
But we don't know who actually determined, for example, who took out your housing allowance, and who made that date change, and who took out the housing allowance and made those determinations.
I don't want to speak for Mr. Rolen, given that he's General Counsel. I'm assuming that they went through him, but he's not here tonight, and that wouldn't necessarily be a fair assumption without him to be able to respond to.
Well, I think it'd be a good answer to have in this process.
I go back to...
But I'd like to just finish that little line of thinking right now, Ms. Mayo, is part of the problem in not having those contracts come before the board and before the public is errors like that get to slide through and then become this controversial matter. So, at this point, I see no way to justify the process, and certainly would not accept the fact that we are not going to want to cure and correct and just say we could do it better. So, Mrs. Mayo?
I would just like a clarification from Mr. Lawrence as to which contract outside counsel would be reviewing. And I'm hoping it's the one that was board adopted on April 23rd, 2012, with the contract extension.
Yes.
Those are the original contracts.
No, the board, through its motion and adoption, took the content of the original contract and said that extended the date of the employment of the 5 employees until June 30th, 2014. If I'm understanding Mr. Lawrence's motion, that's the one that General Counsel would be reviewing, making recommendations for polishing, and returning to the Board of Education.
Those were the documents, in my opinion, those were the documents that were presented to the public and were voted on. I would also clarify that my motion read and prepared with consultation from independent counsel, so it would not be the general counsel.
Right. Outside counsel.
See, this is part of the confusion here, is the contracts were attached to the April 23rd agenda were the original contracts that expired in 2013. And so when you say bring these contracts forward, we're talking about the only ones the public saw were the ones that said 2013 with the housing allowance in it.
Correct, and that's why I'm asking if they are reviewed and cleaned up and presented to the public and voted upon.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Let me reread that, I'm sorry.
I'm trying to type it.
So,
Oh, boy. Just state your motion again, Mr. Lawrence, so we're clear on this. We may be meeting until 11 p.m., by the way.
Yes, so in order to reflect the actions of the board on April 23rd, 2012, and to present valid legal contracts, sorry, that should be the second part. First, I move that the Board of Education finds the Brown Act allegations of Ms. Minion and Ms. lack sufficient merit. Second, in order to reflect the actions of the board on April 23rd, the actions taken by the board on April 23rd, 2012, and to provide valid legal contracts, the board requires the contract extensions to be brought after they have been reviewed and prepared with consultation from independent counsel, allow for public comment, and then voted on by the board.
Okay, and that was moved by Mr. Lawrence, seconded for discussion by Mrs. Oakes, and is there any other discussion on that? Because I still will disagree, because I still believe it's important to simply correct the process and address the citizens' concerns, and we don't have to have that finding that the date has expired. We can simply say, we just fully want to do this better, and we really want to be fully responsive to the community. So unless there's any other comment.
I just have a question. So, Mr. Lawrence, through your motion, the independent counsel would be reviewing the ministerial and the legal requirements for the contract in relation to perhaps AB 1344. You are not asking independent counsel to make substantive changes in the contracts.
That is correct.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, that said, we will take a voice vote because we don't have electronic school board. So,
Could we repeat the motion one more time?
we'll see. I do not have it written down, so I'm going on the audio. And Mrs. Menta.
I'll be re-listening.
Okay, here we go.
I move that the Board of Education finds the Brown Act allegations of Ms. Minion and Ms. lack merit. That's one. Two, in order to reflect the actions taken by the board on April 23rd, 2012, and to provide valid legal contracts, the board requires the contract extensions be brought to the board after they have been reviewed and prepared with consultation from independent counsel, allow for public comment, and then voted on by the board.
Okay, so we will now move to voting, and we must do voting by voice vote. So Mrs. Mayo?
Aye.
Mrs. Oakes?
Aye.
Mr. Lawrence?
Aye.
Mrs. Denver?
Aye.
And Ms. Hanson, no. So motion passes 4-1. And again, we did a substitute motion as Ms. Cooksey advised us. okay? So given that, I mean, normally what you do, Ms. Cooksey, and I'm gonna maintain it again, is you'd accept that as the motion and then, vote on it. But we skipped a step and went to just voting on the substitute motion, okay? So given that, then we would not go back to the motion to cure and correct, Ms. Cooksey? That's your interpretation, I wanna get it all
Right,
down
because
pat.
that motion is now moved.
Right.